The Wyoming Territory sprawled endlessly beneath a cold October sky, its golden grasslands rippling in the wind like waves on a vast ocean. Marcus Whitfield rode his dun mare along the banks of Medicine Creek, checking trap lines that had yielded little in recent weeks, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. At 41, Marcus had the lean build and weathered face of a man who'd spent his adult life living off the land, trapping, hunting, and doing whatever honest work he could find to survive in country that demanded everything and gave back little. His small cabin sat in a sheltered valley where cottonwoods provided windbreak, and the creek never ran dry, even in the harsh Wyoming winters. It wasn't much a single room with a stone fireplace, a few pieces of rough furniture he'd built himself, and shelves lined with the medical supplies he'd accumulated during his years as an army medic during the war. Those supplies, along with the knowledge he'd gained treating wounded soldiers, had served him well in a territory where doctors were scarce and accidents were common. Marcus had built a reputation among the scattered homesteaders and ranchers as someone who could treat injuries and illnesses when professional medical care was days away. He never charged for his services, accepting payment in the form of food, supplies, or simple gratitude. It was this reputation that had led to his current situation, riding out in response to a desperate message that had arrived before dawn. The message had been delivered by a young Crow warrior named Swift Eagle, who spoke enough English to explain that his grandfather was dying and needed help from the white medicine man who helps all people. The elder was Running Elk, a chief of the River Crow band whose people had maintained generally peaceful relations with white settlers despite increasing pressure from the government to move to reservations. Marcus had known Running Elk by reputation, a wise leader who'd managed to keep his people free and independent longer than most Plains tribes, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining their cultural traditions. The thought of such a man dying without proper medical care was enough to send Marcus riding north toward the Crow winter camp, despite the risks involved in treating Indians during a time of increasing tensions. The camp, when Marcus finally reached it, was larger than he'd expected. Perhaps 200 people settled along a tributary of the Yellowstone River, where sheltered valleys provided protection from the harsh winds that swept across the open plains. The tipis were arranged in the traditional circular pattern, with the chief's lodge at the center and the dwellings of important families radiating outward in careful order. Marcus was met at the camp's edge by Swift Eagle and several other warriors, their faces grave with concern for their ailing leader. The young man who'd brought the message led Marcus through the camp toward the chief's teepee, while curious faces peered from lodge entrances and children followed at a respectful distance. "My grandfather has been sick for many days," Swift Eagle explained as they walked. "The old medicine is not helping him, and our medicine man died during the summer from the spotted sickness. We heard that you have strong medicine and help people without asking what color their skin island." Marcus nodded, understanding both the compliment and the responsibility it implied. In a territory where racial tensions often exploded into violence, treating Indians could be seen as collaboration with potential enemies, but a sick old man was still just a sick old man, regardless of politics or prejudice. Running Elk's teepee was spacious and well-appointed, decorated with buffalo robes painted with scenes from the chief's long life, and furnished with the kind of careful attention to comfort that marked a man of importance. But it was clear that death was stalking the lodge. The air was thick with the smell of sickness, and the chief's labored breathing could be heard from outside the dwelling. The old man lay on a bed of furs, his weathered face gray with pain and his breathing shallow and irregular. Marcus knelt beside the chief and began the careful examination that had saved so many lives during his army days, checking pulse, temperature, and the dozens of other signs that could reveal what was killing a patient. Running Elk was conscious but weak, his dark eyes alert despite his body's distress. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, but his English was clear despite his obvious suffering. "White medicine man," he said with effort, "I have heard of your healing gifts. My people, they need me to live long enough, and then to guide them through the winter ahead." Marcus's examination revealed the symptoms of what appeared to be pneumonia, complicated by what might be pleurisy, a potentially fatal combination in a man of Running Elk's advanced age. Without proper antibiotics, which wouldn't be available for decades, treatment would require careful nursing, traditional remedies, and a considerable amount of luck. "Chief," Marcus said gently, "you're very sick, but I think I can help you. It's going to take time and patience, and there are no guarantees. But I've seen men recover from worse conditions, if they're willing to fight for their lives." Running Elk nodded weakly, understanding both the hope and the uncertainty in Marcus's words. Around the teepee, family members gathered to hear what the white medicine man would say about their beloved leader's condition. Marcus spent the next hour explaining to Running Elk's family what treatment would involve careful monitoring, specific medicines from his own supplies, and nursing care that would require someone to stay with the chief constantly. He demonstrated how to prepare poultices for the chest, how to encourage proper breathing, and how to recognize signs of improvement or decline. Swift Eagle translated for family members who spoke no English, while Running Elk's daughter, a woman named Morning Star, proved to have natural nursing instincts that made her an ideal assistant in caring for her father. "I will stay here as long as necessary," Marcus announced to the gathered family. "But I need your help to make this work. Medicine is only part of healing. The rest comes from the care and support of people who love the patient." The treatment began immediately, with Marcus administering carefully measured doses of the medicines he'd brought from his cabin. He'd learned during the war that the difference between life and death often lay in small details: the precise dosage of medicine, the exact positioning of a patient to help breathing, the careful monitoring that could detect changes before they became critical. As night fell over the Crow camp, Marcus settled into what would become a familiar routine, checking the chief's condition every few hours, adjusting treatments as symptoms changed, and working with the family to provide the constant care that serious illness required. "Your grandfather is a strong man," Marcus told Swift Eagle as they maintained their vigil beside Running Elk's bed. "I've seen the will to live overcome conditions that should have been fatal. If anyone can recover from this, it's a man with his courage and determination." The battle for Running Elk's life consumed the next week, with Marcus maintaining an almost constant vigil beside the chief's bedside while family members rotated through nursing duties. The old man's condition fluctuated dramatically, sometimes seeming to improve enough to give everyone hope, other times declining so rapidly that death seemed imminent. Marcus found himself drawing on every technique he'd learned during his years as a field medic, adapting battlefield medicine to the resources available in a Crow winter camp. He fashioned a crude but effective steam tent to help the chief's breathing, prepared herbal remedies using plants that Morning Star gathered from the surrounding countryside, and maintained careful records of symptoms and treatments. But it was the family's dedication that made the real difference in Running Elk's recovery. Swift Eagle and his cousins took turns sitting with their grandfather through the long nights, talking to him in Crow and telling him stories about recent hunts and camp activities that kept him connected to the world of the living. Morning Star proved to be as skilled as any trained nurse, anticipating her father's needs and administering treatments with the precision that Marcus had taught her. "In our way," Morning Star explained to Marcus as they worked together to prepare another dose of medicine, "healing comes not just from plants and potions, but from the love and attention of family. A sick person who feels forgotten will die even if their body should live. A sick person who knows they are needed will fight to survive against impossible odds." The wisdom in her words resonated with Marcus's own observations about what made the difference between patients who recovered and those who didn't. The chief was receiving more than medical treatment. He was surrounded by constant reminders of why his life mattered to his people. On the 8th day, Running Elk's fever finally broke, and his breathing became noticeably easier. Marcus had seen enough recoveries to recognize the turning point when death released its grip and the body's natural healing processes began to assert themselves. "He's going to live," Marcus announced to the anxious family members who'd maintained their vigil throughout the crisis. "He's not well yet, but the worst is over. From here, it's just a matter of rest, good food, and time." The relief that swept through the camp was palpable, expressed in prayers, songs, and quiet celebrations that acknowledged the chief's survival without claiming premature victory over his illness. Marcus found himself included in these expressions of gratitude as someone who'd played a crucial role in preserving their leader's life. But it was Running Elk himself who provided the most meaningful acknowledgement of what Marcus had accomplished. As the chief's strength returned and he was able to speak more clearly, he called Marcus to his bedside for a conversation that would change both their lives. "White medicine man," Running Elk said, his voice still weak but filled with gratitude and dignity. "You came when my people called, even though it might bring you trouble with your own kind. You shared your medicine freely, asked for nothing in return, and worked as hard to save my life as you would have worked to save the life of your own father." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the formal gratitude, but he recognized the importance of allowing the chief to express what he was feeling. In Crow culture, as in many Plains tribes, debts of honor were serious matters that created obligations extending far beyond simple payment for services rendered. "Any decent person would have done the same, Chief," Marcus replied, You were sick, and I had the knowledge to help. It's what human beings do for each other. Running Elk smiled at Marcus's modesty, but his expression remained serious. You do not understand what you have done, my friend. You have not just saved the life of one old Indian. You have saved the future of my people during a time when they need wise leadership more than ever before. As Running Elk's recovery progressed from life-threatening crisis to gradual convalescence, Marcus learned more about the challenges facing the Crow people and the crucial role their chief played in navigating those challenges. The tribe was under increasing pressure from government agents to abandon their traditional territory and move to a distant reservation, while younger warriors advocated for armed resistance that could lead to devastating military retaliation. My grandfather is the one person who commands enough respect to hold our people together during these difficult times, Swift Eagle explained as he and Marcus walked through the winter camp. Without his wisdom and leadership, some families would surrender to the reservation while others would follow the young men into a war we cannot win. Either choice would destroy our people as surely as bullets or disease. Running Elk's recovery had given the Crow time to develop a more sophisticated response to the government pressure they were facing. Instead of choosing between surrender and hopeless resistance, the chief was working to negotiate a middle path that might preserve both his people's freedom and their lives. The white government wants our land, Running Elk explained to Marcus during one of their conversations as the chief regained his strength. But they also want peace and the appearance of justice. If we can show that we are not hostile, that we can live alongside white settlers without constant conflict, we might be able to stay in our traditional territory. The strategy required careful diplomacy and the kind of wisdom that came from decades of experience in dealing with both Indian and white politics. Running Elk had to balance the demands of his own people with the realities of government policy, finding ways to preserve Crow traditions while adapting to circumstances beyond their control. Marcus found himself serving as more than just a medical advisor during his extended stay with the Crow Band. His knowledge of white society and government policies made him a valuable consultant as Running Elk developed his negotiation strategy. You understand both worlds, the chief observed. You know how white men think, but you also understand that Indians are human beings with the same hopes and fears as anyone else. That makes you valuable as someone who can help us communicate effectively with government officials. The medical crisis that had brought Marcus to the Crow camp was gradually replaced by a different kind of collaboration, as he helped Running Elk prepare for the negotiations that would determine his people's future. Marcus's cabin became a staging area where messages were exchanged with territorial officials, and his reputation for honesty made him a credible intermediary between parties that had little reason to trust each other. But it was during Running Elk's recovery period that Marcus encountered something that would transform his own life as dramatically as his medical intervention had transformed the chief's. The Crow Band possessed a herd of horses that was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, animals whose bloodlines, training, and care represented generations of selective breeding and traditional knowledge. Our horses are not just transportation, Morningstar explained as she led Marcus through the herd that was wintering in the protected valley near the camp. They are partners in everything we do: hunting, warfare, ceremonies, daily life. Each horse is bred not just for speed or strength, but for intelligence, loyalty, and the ability to work closely with humans. The horses that Marcus observed were indeed exceptional, sturdy enough for the harsh Wyoming climate, fast enough for buffalo hunting, intelligent enough to work cattle or perform in battle, and gentle enough that children could handle them safely. They represented a level of horse breeding and training that was far superior to anything available through conventional commercial sources. My grandfather has been watching you work with our horses, Swift Eagle said as Marcus admired a particularly impressive mare with her young foal. He sees that you understand them, that you treat them with respect rather than just as tools to be used. Running Elk's complete recovery took nearly 2 months, during which Marcus became an honorary member of the Crow Band, learning their languages, customs, and traditional knowledge while contributing his own skills as healer and advisor. By the time the chief was strong enough to resume his full leadership duties, Marcus had been transformed from a solitary trapper into someone with deep connections to a community that valued his contributions. The negotiations with territorial authorities that Running Elk had been preparing for finally took place in late winter, with Marcus serving as an unofficial mediator who helped both sides understand each other's positions and find common ground. The agreement that emerged allowed the Crow Band to remain in their traditional territory in exchange for commitments to peaceful coexistence with white settlers and cooperation with territorial law enforcement. You made this possible, Running Elk told Marcus as they celebrated the successful negotiations. Without your help as healer, I would have died before we could reach this agreement. Without your help as intermediary, the white officials would never have understood that we seek peace, not war. But the chief wasn't finished expressing his gratitude. During a formal ceremony that included the entire band, Running Elk announced that Marcus would be honored with a gift that represented the highest form of recognition the Crow people could bestow. Marcus Whitfield has proven himself to be a true friend of our people, the chief announced in both Crow and English, so that everyone could understand the significance of what was happening. He risked his own safety to save my life, asked for nothing in return, and helped us navigate the difficult path to peace with honor. Such actions deserve recognition that equals their importance. What Running Elk proposed was unprecedented in Marcus's experience of Indian-white relations. The Crow Band would give Marcus a substantial portion of their prized horse herd, 50 animals representing some of the finest bloodlines and training that Plains Indian culture had produced. These horses are not just a gift, the chief explained. They are a partnership. You will help us breed and train future generations while learning the traditional knowledge that created them. Together, we will develop horses that serve both our people's needs and the changing world we all must face. Marcus was stunned by the generosity of the offer and the trust it represented. The horses being offered to him were worth a fortune by any measure, but their value went far beyond money. They represented access to traditional knowledge that had been developed over centuries and was rarely shared with outsiders. Chief, I can't accept such a valuable gift, Marcus protested, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. I just did what any decent person would do when someone needed medical help. Running Elk smiled at Marcus's humility, but his expression remained serious. You still do not understand what you accomplished, my friend. You saved more than my life. You saved my people's future. The horses we offer are not payment for services rendered. They are an investment in continued partnership that will benefit both our communities for generations to come. The ceremony that formalized the gift was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed, a blend of traditional Crow rituals and newly created elements that acknowledged the unprecedented nature of what was happening. Marcus found himself adopted as an honorary member of the tribe, while also being recognized as a bridge between two worlds that needed to learn from each other. The practical arrangements for managing the horse herd required Marcus to establish facilities that could handle such a large operation. With help from his new Crow partners, he expanded his modest homestead into a substantial ranch that could provide proper care for the animals, while serving as a training center where traditional and modern techniques could be combined. What we are creating here, Running Elk observed as they watched the horses settling into their new environment, is something that has never existed before, a partnership between Indian and white knowledge that makes both traditions stronger. The transformation of Marcus's modest homestead into a major horse breeding and training operation attracted attention from throughout the Wyoming territory. Word spread quickly that a former trapper had somehow acquired a herd of exceptional horses and was producing animals that surpassed anything available through conventional channels. The first customers who came to examine Marcus's horses were skeptical. Most white ranchers and cavalry officers had fixed ideas about Indian ponies being inferior to proper horses bred by white breeders. But skepticism quickly changed to amazement when they saw animals that combined the hardiness and intelligence of Plains Indian horses with the size and conformation that white buyers preferred. "Where did you get these animals?" asked Colonel Morrison, a cavalry officer who'd come to evaluate horses for potential military purchase. "They're unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of frontier service." Marcus had anticipated such questions and had developed careful answers that respected his Crow partner's privacy while explaining the quality of his horses. "I've been working with local Indian breeders who have generations of experience developing animals suited to this climate and terrain. The results speak for themselves." What Marcus didn't mention was that several Crow horsemen were living on his ranch, continuing to work with the animals while teaching him the traditional methods that had produced such exceptional results. Swift Eagle had become his primary partner in the operation, bridging the gap between Crow knowledge and the demands of white customers. The success of the horse operation required Marcus to learn business skills that had never been necessary during his years as a trapper and occasional healer. He had to master the complexities of breeding records, financial management, and marketing, while maintaining the quality standards that made his horses so valuable. But it was the human relationships that proved most challenging and most rewarding. Working closely with his Crow partners required Marcus to understand cultural differences, navigate language barriers, and develop new forms of cooperation that respected both traditions while creating something entirely new. "We are not just breeding horses," Morningstar observed as she worked with Marcus to train a particularly promising young stallion. "We are breeding understanding between our peoples. Every horse that goes to a white owner carries with it some of our knowledge and care. Every white person who learns from our methods gains respect for our capabilities." The breeding program that developed at Marcus's ranch became a model for the kind of cooperation that Running Elk had envisioned during his negotiations with territorial authorities. White ranchers and cavalry officers came to buy horses, but they also came to learn techniques that were proving superior to conventional methods. Dr. James Patterson, a veterinarian from the territorial capital, spent a month studying the traditional horse care methods being practiced at Marcus's ranch. His subsequent report, published in agricultural journals, brought national attention to the innovations being developed in Wyoming. The integration of Native American horse breeding and training techniques with European American ranching methods has produced results that exceed what either tradition could accomplish alone. Dr. Patterson wrote, "This collaboration represents a new model for livestock development that could influence the entire American West." The academic recognition led to government contracts for horses trained using the integrated methods Marcus and his Crow partners had developed. The U.S. Cavalry, always in need of reliable mounts, became one of their best customers as word spread about horses that could outperform conventional military mounts in endurance, intelligence, and adaptability. But perhaps most importantly, the success of the horse operation had created a new model for Indian-white relations that was based on mutual respect and shared benefit, rather than conquest and subjugation. By 1885, the horse ranch that had grown from Running Elk's gift had become one of the most successful livestock operations in the Wyoming Territory. Marcus employed over 30 people, including both white ranch hands and Crow horsemen who worked together to maintain the integrated breeding and training programs that had made the operation famous. The ranch itself had evolved into something resembling a small town, with separate quarters for different groups of workers, a large stable complex that could house over 200 horses, and training facilities that attracted visitors from throughout the American West. But it was the cultural integration that impressed visitors most, the sight of white and Indian cowboys working side by side, sharing knowledge and techniques while maintaining respect for their different traditions. Running Elk, now fully recovered and recognized as one of the most successful Indian leaders in negotiating peaceful relations with white authorities, spent increasing amounts of time at Marcus's ranch, serving as an advisor and elder statesman who helped resolve conflicts and maintain the delicate balance that made such cooperation possible. What we have accomplished here proves that the future of this territory depends not on one people conquering another, but on different peoples learning to work together, the chief observed during a gathering that celebrated the 5th anniversary of Marcus's adoption into the Crow Band. The horse breeding program had expanded beyond its original focus to include cattle and sheep, with Crow knowledge of animal husbandry being combined with modern ranching techniques to create operations that were more efficient and sustainable than conventional approaches. Marcus found himself serving as an unofficial ambassador between Indian and white communities throughout the region, using his unique position and reputation to mediate disputes and facilitate cooperation that benefited everyone involved. People trust you because you've proven that you see Indians as human beings rather than obstacles or enemies, explained Judge Harrison, a territorial official who often consulted Marcus about Indian relations. That makes you valuable as someone who can help both sides find common ground. The success of the ranch had made Marcus wealthy beyond anything he'd imagined during his years as a trapper. But more importantly, it had given him a sense of purpose and community that had been missing from his solitary existence. He'd become part of an extended family that included not just his Crow partners but the network of ranchers, cavalry officers, and business people who'd come to depend on the horses and knowledge produced at his ranch. Swift Eagle, who'd become Marcus's primary partner in managing the horse operation, had married and started a family of his own, raising his children to be comfortable in both Crow and white society, while maintaining their cultural identity. "My children will grow up knowing that cooperation is possible," Swift Eagle said as they watched his young son learning to ride on horses bred from Running Elk's original gift. "They will carry forward the lessons we've learned here about how different peoples can work together for mutual benefit." The educational aspects of the ranch had expanded to include formal programs where young people from both white and Indian communities could learn integrated approaches to animal husbandry, range management, and cross-cultural communication. Graduates of these programs were finding employment throughout the territory as the demand grew for people who could bridge cultural divides. "What we're teaching here," Marcus explained to a group of territorial educators who'd come to study the ranch's training programs, is that diversity of knowledge and experience makes everyone stronger. When we combine the best of Indian and white traditions, we achieve results that neither approach could produce alone. The ranch's success had attracted the attention of Eastern investors who were interested in expanding the operation and commercializing the breeding techniques that had proven so successful. But Marcus and his Crow partners were careful to maintain control over their operation, ensuring that expansion didn't compromise the cultural integration and traditional knowledge that made their horses so exceptional. "We've had offers to buy the ranch for more money than I ever imagined having," Marcus confided to Running Elk during one of their regular planning sessions. "But money isn't the point of what we've built here. This is about proving that different peoples can work together and create something better than either could achieve alone." The chief nodded approvingly at Marcus's commitment to their shared vision. Despite his advanced age, Running Elk remained actively involved in the ranch's operations, serving as a respected elder whose wisdom guided major decisions and helped maintain the delicate balance that made such cooperation possible. The horses produced at Marcus's ranch had gained a reputation that extended far beyond the Wyoming territory. Buyers came from as far away as California and Texas to acquire animals that were known for their intelligence, stamina, and versatility. But more importantly, they came to learn about the methods that produced such exceptional results. The ranch had become an informal research center, where traditional Native American knowledge was combined with modern scientific methods to advance understanding of animal behavior, breeding techniques, and sustainable ranching practices. Universities sent students to study the integrated approaches being developed, while government agencies consulted Marcus and his partners about policies affecting both livestock and Indian relations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, one of the first female veterinarians in the American West, spent 6 months at the ranch documenting the traditional healing methods that Crow horsemen used to maintain animal health without relying heavily on manufactured medicines. The traditional knowledge preserved by the Crow people represents centuries of careful observation and experimentation, Dr. Mitchell wrote in her report. These techniques often prove more effective than conventional veterinary treatments, particularly for horses living in harsh frontier conditions. The integration of traditional and modern approaches had created innovations that were being adopted by ranchers throughout the West. Techniques for natural healing, sustainable grazing, and humane training methods developed at Marcus's ranch were proving superior to conventional practices in many situations. But perhaps most importantly, the ranch had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over prejudice, and mutual respect over cultural chauvinism. The children who grew up around the ranch, both white and Indian, were developing into adults who saw cultural diversity as natural and beneficial rather than threatening. They spoke multiple languages, understood different traditions, and were comfortable working with people from various backgrounds. "These young people represent the future of the American West," observed Reverend Thompson, a missionary who'd initially been skeptical of the close cooperation between white and Indian families at the ranch. "They've learned that different doesn't mean inferior, and that working together produces better results than competing against each other." The success of Marcus's ranch had influenced government policy toward Indian relations, providing evidence that integration and cooperation produced better results than policies based on separation and control. Officials who visited the ranch found it difficult to maintain traditional assumptions about the impossibility of peaceful coexistence. As the 1,882nd drew to a close, the horse ranch that had grown from Running Elk's grateful gift had become one of the most influential livestock operations in the American West. The techniques developed there were being taught at agricultural colleges, while the social model of their cooperation was being studied by government officials and community leaders throughout the country. Marcus, now recognized as one of the territory's most successful ranchers and most effective advocates for Indian-white cooperation, often reflected on the chain of events that had transformed his life so completely. A simple decision to help a sick old man had led to relationships and opportunities that had exceeded his wildest dreams. "When I rode into that Crow camp to help Running Elk, I thought I was just doing my duty as someone with medical knowledge," Marcus said during a speech at the territorial capital. "I never imagined that saving one man's life would lead to building something that would benefit so many others." Running Elk, despite being well into his 80s, remained active in the ranch's operations and continued to serve as a bridge between traditional Crow culture and the modern world that his people were adapting to. His successful negotiation of peaceful relations with white authorities had made him one of the most respected Indian leaders in the region. The horses that had started it all continued to be the ranch's primary focus, but the operation had expanded to include cattle, sheep, and agricultural experiments that combined traditional Indian farming techniques with modern scientific methods. The diversity of the operation reflected the diversity of knowledge that had made it successful. Swift Eagle, who'd grown from a young warrior seeking help for his grandfather into a successful rancher and community leader in his own right, he was preparing to take over much of the day-to-day management of the operation as Marcus and Running Elk aged. "What my grandfather and Marcus built here will continue for many generations," Swift Eagle said during a ceremony marking the 10th anniversary of the original horse gift. "We've created something that proves different peoples can work together and create prosperity that benefits everyone involved." The educational programs that had grown from the ranch's success were producing graduates who were finding leadership positions throughout the West. Young people who'd learned integrated approaches to ranching, animal husbandry, and cross-cultural communication were becoming teachers, government officials, and business leaders who carried forward the lessons of cooperation and mutual respect. The ranch had also become a model for sustainable resource management that was attracting attention from conservationists and environmental scientists. The traditional Crow knowledge of land stewardship, combined with modern scientific understanding, had created approaches to ranching that maintained ecosystem health while producing economic benefits. "What we've learned here," Marcus explained to a group of visiting scientists, "is that traditional knowledge often contains scientific principles that modern research is just beginning to understand." The Crow people developed sustainable practices through centuries of careful observation and experimentation. The success of the ranch had made both Marcus and his Crow partners wealthy, but more importantly, it had created a legacy of cooperation and understanding that was influencing the development of the entire region. The horses that continued to be bred and trained at the ranch were now found throughout the American West, carrying with them the genes and training methods that represented the best of both Indian and white traditions. But they also carried a more important legacy, the proof that cooperation could produce results superior to competition or conflict. As the 19th century drew to a close, the transformation that had begun with Marcus's treatment of a sick Crow chief had influenced the development of the entire American West. The cooperative model pioneered at his ranch had been adapted to different conditions and communities throughout the region, proving that the principles of mutual respect and shared knowledge could work in various circumstances. Marcus, now in his 60s and recognized as one of the most successful ranchers in Wyoming, had achieved prosperity and influence beyond anything he'd imagined during his years as a solitary trapper. But more importantly, he'd become part of an extended family that transcended racial boundaries and cultural differences. The ranch that had grown from Running Elk's gift employed over 100 people, representing multiple cultural backgrounds, and continued to serve as a training center where traditional knowledge and modern techniques were combined to create innovations in animal husbandry and sustainable agriculture. Running Elk lived to be 91, spending his final years as a revered elder whose wisdom was sought by leaders from both Crow and white communities. His vision of cooperation between peoples had been realized in ways that exceeded even his optimistic expectations, creating a legacy that would influence the region for generations to come. "The gift of horses we gave to Marcus was the beginning of something much larger," the old chief said during his final visit to the ranch. "We gave him animals, but together we created understanding. We shared our knowledge, but together we built bridges between worlds that had been separated by fear and misunderstanding." When Running Elk died peacefully in his sleep, his funeral was attended by over 3,000 people, representing dozens of different communities throughout the West. Marcus delivered one of the eulogies, speaking about a friendship that had proven the possibility of true partnership between peoples who'd been taught to see each other as enemies. "He taught me that healing goes beyond medicine," Marcus said to the gathered mourners. "The greatest healing happens when people learn to see past their differences and work together for the benefit of everyone. The horses he gave me were just the beginning. The real gift was the knowledge that cooperation creates prosperity that no individual effort could achieve." Marcus lived to be 76, spending his final years as a beloved patriarch whose life story had become legend throughout the Wyoming territory. The ranch he'd built continued to operate under the management of the extended family that had grown from his partnership with Running Elk's people. At his funeral, speakers from a dozen different cultural backgrounds stood to honor a man who'd shown them that kindness could be repaid in ways that created lasting benefits for entire communities. The horses that grazed in the pastures around the ranch served as living monuments to what could be accomplished when people chose cooperation over conflict. The breeding program that Marcus and his Crow partners had developed continued to produce exceptional horses for decades, but its most important legacy was the proof that traditional knowledge and modern methods could be combined to create innovations that served everyone's needs. Modern historians who studied Marcus's ranch noted that it had served as a model for successful Indian-white relations at a time when most such interactions ended in conflict and tragedy. The techniques developed there for cross-cultural cooperation were eventually adopted by government agencies and educational institutions throughout the country. But perhaps the most fitting monument to Marcus's legacy was the continued prosperity of the communities that had grown from his partnership with Running Elk's people. Families that might have been enemies had become relatives. Children grew up bilingual and bicultural, and the principles of mutual respect and shared benefit had become the foundation for a regional culture that welcomed diversity as strength. The sacred herd that had started it all continued to graze in the Wyoming grasslands, their bloodlines carrying forward the genetic legacy of centuries of careful breeding, while symbolizing the human legacy of cooperation that had made their existence possible. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the wind whispered through the grass and the horses gathered near the ranch buildings, visitors swore they could still hear the voices of Marcus and Running Elk discussing their plans for the future. Two old friends whose partnership had proven that the greatest gifts aren't those we receive, but those we give freely to others who transform them into blessings that multiply across generations. The cowboy who treated a sick elder had discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or acres, but in relationships that created opportunities for entire communities to prosper. The herd he received had been valuable, but the friendship that made it possible had been priceless. A reminder that sometimes the most precious gifts are those that grow from simple acts of human kindness extended across the artificial boundaries that too often divide us from one another.